right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. We're going to get started in just a few minutes here, but for those of you folks who are the early birds and already hopped on, my name's Katie. I am the Customer Success Manager here at CheckpointEHR. And we also have James Childress. He is a CPA and the advisor and founder of CAC Advising. Yeah, say hi, James.
Hello, great to be with you all today.
Thank you. Yeah, so like I said, we'll get started in just a few minutes. We're going to wait for a couple of other folks to hop on. While we're waiting for them to hop on, if you want to check out our social media pages, we do have those up and available for you. Everyone is muted. Your cameras are turned on though. You're more than welcome to turn them off if you want, but we also love seeing faces. Yeah, so like I said, we'll go ahead and get started in just a few minutes. We're going to allow some other people to hop on. And while we're waiting, if you want to make sure you can see the Q&A section at the top of your screen, because there will be a Q&A portion after the webinar, I'm going to go ahead and post a quick hello in there, just to make sure you can see it. All right, yeah. So if you guys want to thumbs up that, if you want to post who you are, where you're from, what agency you're with, we would love to hear that from you. All right, so it's about 1:02, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. This is recorded, so if anyone pops on late, they'll be able to get these intros, okay? All right. So again, just going to go over the housekeeping real quick. You are muted. Your cameras are enabled. There is a Q&A session that'll be held after the presentation. So as you think of your question, definitely feel free to post it in the Q&A. But we are going to hold the questions until the end. Okay. There is a recording that'll be available after the webinar. Yeah, and then again, if you have a question, just make sure you see those two chat bubbles. The Q&A sometimes works. If you can't find it, there's also the chat option as well. Okay. All right, but yeah, so let's go ahead and get into it. So like I said before, we have James Childress here. He is a CPA and the advisor and founder of CAC Advisors. So today he's going to be talking to you about the financial value of practice systems. He's going to teach you about how the right systems can really help cut down on turnover, boost efficiency, and just help you better assess your team's overall performance. He'll be sharing some insights to help you think about how to create systems that'll actually work for your team. Okay. Yeah, so without further ado, James, if you want to take it away.
Sure. Thanks so much, Katie. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for being here with us today. And I wanted to give a little bit of an intro for me, kind of describe who I am and what I do. Obviously, my name is James Childress. I'm a CPA, but don't hold it against me. At least I hope you won't. And I'll tell you why I think you won't have to, with a little story. So early in my career, I was working for a CPA in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and we went down to Denver, Colorado for a tax update. And for us, when we do these tax updates, it's a 2-day affair, maybe longer, 8 hours in a day. And we were having lunch with like 25 CPAs to a table. There's like 300 people there entirely. Well, after 2 days of this, again, early in my career, he's driving us back and he just looks at me while he's driving. He says, "You know what, James? Most accountants are boring snobs." And I thought, oh man, don't put that on me. I don't want to be a boring snob. So it was very important to me from that point in my career to not be a boring snob and instead be relevant and be helpful, and also to not talk down to my clients, right? So I think it's very important as CPAs, really all professionals, mechanics, dentists, doctors, therapists even, we communicate things according to our client's level of understanding and, of course, their level of interest. So it's our job to explain our techniques and skills and what we do, just as it is everyone else's. And so I'm going to endeavor today to bring to you some of the knowledge I gained through the last 20 plus years of being an accountant, working with clients of all different shapes and sizes and all types of industries, and of course now focusing on private practice. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure it's relevant, useful, and you can act on it in a way that is not snobbish. So that being said, let me go ahead and share my screen. Katie, do I need to go ahead and just go for it, I guess?
Yep, go right ahead.
Okay. All right, cool. Okay, so and I think everyone should be seeing the slides now.
Yep.
So this is the financial value of practice systems presented by Moa. And we're going to go over a lot today, and I'm going to leave some time for Q&A. So really do please, as we go through this, make note of anything that might make this especially practical and useful for you. If you have a specific use case, you want to go over a particular challenge that it just sort of brings up in your mind, or something that might be helpful for your peers who are on the call, please do keep it in mind, and we'll save some time to address it. So, but that being said, let me go ahead and kind of dig in here. So let's talk a little bit, just kind of as an intro. There's sort of some skepticism around systems, and even those of us who've been in the business world for a long time, when people start talking about systems, we sometimes sort of roll our eyes and kind of, here we go again, and that's because there are people who take systems a little too far, right? They tend to document everything. They have everything written down, and it never actually gets looked at. And it's just sort of an exercise in sort of, documenting everything. This is not what we're after today. We want to do something very, very real, very, very useful, because on the other end of the spectrum, when we don't document our systems, we create some real significant challenges for our organization. We're going to talk about what those are. Those challenges would be sort of the cost of poorly documented systems. We're going to also talk about the value of those systems when they're done right. We're going to talk about some simple and practical approaches that you can use that will build over time and really help you. And so let's kind of get into some of that. First, a little bit from a theoretical standpoint. So I'm a huge proponent of the systems and teachings and guidelines given to us by a man named William Edwards Deming. And I think it's worth sharing a little bit about who this person is and why he's so important. So William Edwards Deming was sort of laughed out of the boardrooms of American businesses, around the 1930s and 1940s. And he was actually sent to the country of Japan after World War II. He was sent there to conduct a census because they didn't know how many people were on the island. And he's an incredible figure in the business world because he's largely credited for what they now call the Japanese economic miracle. And so this is where the country of Japan, after already they went before the war started, they were in a bad spot, but definitely, as you know, after that war was over, it was desolate. There was so much destruction, and they were really in dire straits. Well, he was sent there to conduct a census just to see how many people were on the island and what sort of they could do to get started. He eventually became involved in their businesses, and they call it the Japanese economic miracle because within 20 to 30 years, they had become the third largest world economic superpower after having been, again, in those dire straits. So we talk nowadays about Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs and Steve Ballmer and Bill Gates and like all these people that are really big in the business world, but they were talking about Deming. And when you think about like Harvard Business School and these other places, they're relying on Deming's concepts and others who followed, but he really was a game changer for the entire world. And they still have an annual Deming Prize for innovation and quality management. That being said, it's a very important quote from him. 85% of the reasons for failure are deficiencies in the systems and processes rather than the employee. The role of management is to change the process, excuse me, rather than badgering individuals to do better. Now, this is very, very important for several different reasons. First, let's keep in mind what he's saying. He's saying most of the reason why things aren't going well, if they're not going well, is because the systems and processes that we are providing to the employee are insufficient for them to do their job well. Now, the other thing he's doing, and this is very, very important for the work we're doing in business and really in any endeavor, is we want to be very clear where the problem lies. And so it's sort of an anti-scapegoating approach that he's after, which is very critical for any time we're trying to fix something. Basically, what he's saying is, most of the time people will just say someone is near a problem and they'll say that person's the cause. And that is definitely a bad idea. Nowadays in the modern world, there's a saying a lot of people like to throw around, which is hire slow and fire fast. And I can agree with the hire slow part, but firing fast often is a result of this scapegoating, right? Someone is near something that went wrong, so we assume that they're the problem, when in reality, it could very well be that they were just the result of several bottlenecks that compounded, and that person's job became unsustainable. So, the other thing he's doing here is he's saying very clearly, we don't want to conflate the issue. And conflation is when we take multiple things. It's kind of something our brains typically do. Of course, you guys probably know more about how this works than I do. But conflation is when we treat many things as if they're one thing. And so he's saying, 85%, right? That's kind of an interesting figure. He's not saying half or whatever. I think what he's after there is, there's a lot of things at play. There's always a lot of things at play. And anytime we want to actually figure out what's going wrong, the first thing we need to do is we need to subdivide. We need to dig into things. We need to separate it into separate components and look at each of them individually and see how they're doing and what they're contributing to the whole. That's the first start of sort of systematic thinking. And the other thing he said here, which is again a good quote, he's got a lot of them, but a bad system will beat a good person every time. So this is another thing to throw out, especially at this early stage when we talk about systems and their value, is because you can have a great team player doing all the things right as best as they can. But if you saddle that person with a bad process and put them in a bad system, they won't succeed. They can't overcome that level of systematic deficiency, as we would call it. So just kind of a lesson sort of framing this. We really want to think about systems carefully. We especially want to be very careful of conflation and scapegoating, where we think one thing is the cause, and there's actually multiple things that can contribute. So let's keep going. This is a photo of this handsome devil, William Edwards Deming. I just felt like I should share who he was and what he looked like. Again, you'll see a lot of his concepts in this. Anyway, I just thought it'd be good for you to see who he was. So a little bit about my experience with system failures. So I'm kind of an odd duck as a CPA. Most CPAs get into this and they dig into accounting, or I should say they dig into auditing, or they dig into taxes, and they just kind of keep on going. My experience as a CPA was very varied. And so I did a lot of different things. I did taxes, bookkeeping, payroll, business valuation, accounting systems, all types of stuff, until eventually, found myself working directly with owners as an advisor, now practice owners as an advisor. But what I had through my experience is we actually were getting referrals from other accounting firms most of the time, because they would encounter something that they just didn't want to deal with. It was very odd. I had one client come to us, their bookkeeper went to lunch and never came back. I had another one, actually they had their accounting clerk, or I should say their finance director, had a brain aneurysm and they had to do payroll that day, and they just needed resources now, and that person was completely gone and unavailable. Had another one where the executive team and the board of directors of this organization were all fired at the same time. And so we had lots of these situations in my career where it was like all hands on deck, lots of needs and demands from that client. And what became really clear is it wasn't the case that there weren't systems in these organizations. There were systems, but there weren't any documented systems. And what we found is there was an immense challenge for these organizations to sort of get back on track and get any kind of, balanced, even footing. And so it took a lot of effort, and there were a lot of hidden costs that sort of came to the fore. And so what the lesson this tells us, and one of my clients actually described this best one time when we were talking about it. He described it as the difference between what he called tribal knowledge and organizational knowledge or institutional knowledge. And what we basically see and if I can give a little segue for an analogy, at the risk of sounding egotistical, I just want everyone here to understand I am an expert at tying my shoes. And I've known lots of people, and I haven't really done a side by side comparison, but I got to tell you, I'm good. I'm really good. Like I have this weird loopy thing I do where when I pull it, like the loops and the laces are actually the same length. It's taken me about 46 years of working on this. I also have this little system. I don't know how this happened, but I create the first knot, and it's just the right level, and then I pull the second knot down to it to make that one a little bit tighter, and it keeps my shoes from being too tight, because I had that at some time. So I use this as an analogy because I just think it's a good example, because I have never conveyed to anyone my incredible method for tying my shoes. I've not written it down. I've not shown anyone how to do it. There's no YouTube video on my channel explaining this incredible technique I have. And so what would happen, like, let's say I was in an organization and let's say we tie shoes, right? Let's just imagine some science fiction world where people tie your shoes for you, right? So we tie shoes, and I have this cool technique, and it creates a perfect tied shoe. But I don't share it with anyone. So let's say something were to happen, and let's say I go on vacation to Greece and I decide actually it's cool this time of year, but it's actually cool all the times of the year, and I decide to stay there and I never go back. This is a great example. So that information and that incredible technique of tying shoes would go with me, and no one in my organization would have it. The other interesting thing about that is, like, preceding that moment, no one else in the organization would have been able to gain anything from my little awesome system of expertly tying shoes. And so this is the real problem. This is where this cost comes in for what we call tribal knowledge versus organizational knowledge. If everything is in everyone's head, two major things happen to us that don't help us out. One, none of these things are shared. Peers don't actually share this information amongst each other and gain knowledge from the other who accomplished something significant. And in turn, despite my incredible expertise with tying shoes, it may very well be that I've got a peer that I'm working with who actually is doing it better than I am, as odd as that might sound. And I lose that, right? So when we're talking about that particular organization expertly tying shoes, we want peers to communicate. We want to make that easy, and we want to almost make it like an afterthought, where it just sort of happens as part of the work, the sharing of this knowledge and the dispensing of it across maybe some sort of network, and documentation of what our process is, so we can create the best possible process and replicate it as often as possible. And then, of course, if someone were to leave the organization, that knowledge stays with us, because the real truth is, let's move to the next slide here. The real truth is that every organization is paying for efficiency. But if they don't document what that efficiency is and how it works, they don't keep it. So imagine you were to pay for a couch. Like, let's say you've got an office space and you've got a waiting room and you've got couches and furniture and fixtures. You got stuff on the walls. You have a little desk for someone to do like intake and meet with people and when they show up. Let's imagine that you're paying for it and you think it's yours, but then one day all of your office equipment gets sick or decides they want to go on vacation and never come back, and then all this stuff just disappears, right? That sounds like nonsensical. Like the stuff we paid for and put in the office, we paid good money for, it's ours, and now it's gone. That doesn't make any sense. Well, of course, it doesn't make any sense. But the thing is, the same thing happens in organizations all over the place. And so, if we were to give like a basic example, there's benchmarking that we do with practices to help them understand kind of where they're at, how they fit in against their peers, all this type of stuff. Admin costs maybe for like a $500,000 practice could be estimated around $70,000. Don't get too stuck on that particular number. I just want to say kind of entry level, and that would be like the little bit we see across everybody, a little bit of time on the executive, or I should say the owner, maybe a little bit of clinical director time, a little bit of admin assistant time, like all over the place. There's just sort of this admin thing that's always kind of happening. There's always sort of this systems component of everything gelling up and all the things everyone has in their head. So if we were to think about that and we were to think about that cost, annual, let's say 25% of that is creating a good system that works and gels things together and holds everything together in a way that makes sense. Let's say 25% of that, and after 4 years, the person or the people that were involved in that go away. That's when we would see that cost start to surface. We would start seeing ourselves wondering, well, how did we do that? And like, well, what was it that Sam was doing whenever this happened? And how do we get that thing into the website? And like, well, what is it that we have to do with that particular insurance to make sure we're compliant? All those things are just gone. They're just gone. And what we find is there's been an investment, and basically in that case, 25% of this was admin. After 4 years, we'd see like a $70,000 hard cost, but there'd be other things that would come up. We'd have to retrain, we'd have to redo, there'd be delays, there'd be opportunity costs because we're not just being productive. And all these sort of random things start to show up. All this friction starts to take place in our organization just because we don't know what's going on and what it was we were missing when that person left. And that's the real cost, So what do we need to do? We need to start thinking about what these things are. We need to start chipping away at it. We need to start making some forward progress. Now, this is where most people find that they get a little bit overloaded. And I want to talk a little bit about that. So like, how do we find where to start? And so bottlenecks are anything that's really kind of holding things up. And when we think about Henry Ford is credited with inventing the automobile. That's a little bit of a misunderstanding because Henry Ford actually created the assembly line. And that was his biggest contribution. And he created a system where an automobile could be produced efficiently, right? So if you think about that, and the same thing happened with Edison. Most people think Edison invented the light bulb. Edison invented the commercially viable light bulb. A light bulb you could turn on and leave on, and it wouldn't just explode. And so that was his contribution, right? So repeatability and consistency in systems actually are more important than we realize. The trouble is we inflate them like they're this huge deal. We don't even get started. And we also sort of the barrier to entry becomes bigger because we think we're already doing okay. We don't really recognize what's at stake. So here's an example. So a way to get started and identifying some bottlenecks. First, you can do a very, very simple thing, which is to conduct a simple survey amongst your team. Just ask some very open-ended kind of generic questions. So you're going to ask, what do you always feel behind on? That's a great one to ask. If you've got a pretty well-knit team and you don't mind people sort of being a little bit more frank, you can also ask, no judgment aside, but are you ever waiting on something from someone else? And you can elaborate for them, hey, bottlenecks show up in chains, right? And typically one creates another, which creates another. Like we talked about earlier, we see someone near a problem, but they might not be the problem. You can elaborate on what you're basically asking there, but like, am I ever waiting on something from somebody else? Okay, is that person ever waiting on something from somebody else? Again, we want to diagnose, we want to subdivide, we want to look inside to see what's going on. The other thing you can just stay tuned to is what we call an ask versus look test. So if we say, what do we do about this, that, or the other thing? And someone responds, ask Jenny. Well, what that means is whatever it is that's happening is in Jenny's head, and it's not part of our documented system. But if people start saying, look at the handbook, look at the manual, look at the checklist, look at what our process is, look online for the list of the procedures related to that. Then we start knowing we're starting to get a little bit of traction. So what you ultimately want to find as you work on this again slowly is you want to find that when it comes to these bottlenecks, people are starting to talk about what they look to instead of who they ask. And that means it's written down somewhere that people can access. So that's just a very important thing just to sort of get things started. Now, let's also talk about the hardest part. The very hardest part about this, and I'm totally sincere, the hard part is making it easy and keeping it easy and getting started ultimately. So most of the time, like I said, people inflate this and they make a mountain out of a molehill when really we just want to take some small, simple, steady steps. Most systems don't get built because people make it a little bit overcomplicated. And this is where I like to say that version 1 is better than version none. You just want to start somewhere. And so when you go through that little process of thinking about bottlenecks, thinking about collisions that are happening, people being ready to do something, but they don't have the thing they need to do it yet, because something else is kind of hung up somewhere. You want to think about those, maybe take that survey, and you want to start weighing these things a little bit. Like, which one, if we were to fix now, would have the biggest impact? And then take that list of those that have a big impact and think, which one can we get started on the easiest? And then basically we want to subdivide all of the components, all of the steps, get into the details, figure out everything that's involved, figuring out all the people who have a part to play, how they're interacting with each other, and trying to make that smooth. Start small and then build from there. So again, we can use another quote from another person in history that's very influential for us. Voltaire once said, "The best is the enemy of the good," right? And that's a lesson to us to not hold this fictional perfectionistic viewpoint in front of us about what we're trying to accomplish. We just want to start getting rolling on this and get some things in play. And you will feel some incredible relief someday when you have, and imagine yourself in this future, say, 2-3 years down the road, when you have maybe an outsourced vendor, you have a clinical director, or you have, your number one clinician depart, and you actually know like what it was they were doing, the process they went through, the steps they had, who they most recently were working with or weren't working with, and how they did it. You're going to feel immense relief. And anytime you start feeling like, I don't need to do that this month or this quarter or this year, think about the future you and how much they'll thank you for being very clear with documented systems, because I know it's going to happen. And I know you can get started and you can make it really easy. That's what we're here to talk about. So I think we're doing okay on time. I'm going to keep cruising. So let's talk then about accountability. So back to Deming's quote, right? 85%, however he got that number, right? I think what he was really kind of the subtext there is that there's always multiple things, right? So let's say you go through this work of figuring out what's actually taking place. You have a process, which is basically what one person does. A process happens at a node of a system, and then those processes get done and something goes to another part of the system. So people are responsible for processes. And now if you've taken something that you would normally think is just one thing, and you've got it listed out as the many things it actually is, then what you can do is you can go to that team member who's involved and you can use a 3-part test. So you can ask that team member, do they understand what this process is, just top to bottom? Or are there any things that just blatantly don't make sense? And then you can say, do you feel like you're capable of executing it? Very good. That's another part of what we're doing here. Now, because we've done those few things, we know that they understand it at a basic level, and we know they're capable of executing it. They said so. Then we can ask, are they willing? Now, most of the time, people have trouble holding anyone accountable because they don't acknowledge these first two things. Most of the time, accountability is referencing an unspoken conversation, a conversation we wish we had had. Now, in a moment where we want to say to someone, hey, this actually really sucks. We need this to be better. We want to reference that and say, we were hoping we said, hey, I really want it to look like X, so that in that moment we can say, hey, this is really what I wanted. Well, the trick is don't kick that can further down the road, have the conversation. But you'll notice in step one, or the two parts, part one and part two, This is where we acknowledge our role. If someone's working in our organization and they don't even understand what we ask them to do, how can we expect them to do it? If we don't give them the training and the ability to learn how to accomplish all those steps to a high level, we can't expect them to do it. They don't have autonomy and responsibility in that process because we haven't created the process for them. We haven't created the training for them. This is exactly what Deming was saying. You can't hold someone accountable to a system or a process that doesn't work and that they don't know how to do. But ultimately, if we've done that, if we've done those things, then we get to the important piece. Perhaps they're just not willing to do this piece. And that's okay. At least now we know. So as a manager, a supervisor, an owner, this is an incredible gift you give yourself to work to the point where you clarify all the noise, get all the noise out of the way, and get to a spot where you can say, you know what, I just don't think this person really is interested in this part of what we're doing. And perhaps we're not a good fit. That's exceptional for you because you don't sit in the gray this whole time wondering, well, is it a good fit or not? Like you actually have things split out. You know what they're good at and what they're not. You know what they understand and what they're able to execute and what they're not able to execute. And then you're able to get leverage and say, okay, let's just train you on this piece, and then ultimately figure out if they really just want to step up or not. So that's a great part of systems because otherwise you find yourself sort of thinking, well, I don't know, like they're good in this, they're bad in that. But if you lay it all out and you realize, oh my gosh, this part where they're actually not doing well is critical for 5 other people. And the fact that they're not good at it is holding these other people up. That's a major issue for us. We got to dig into that and fix it. So this is a great start to having real accountability. And ultimately what Deming was saying with that first quote, don't hold people accountable to the things that they have no control over. So this is us exerting our control over the things that we actually can. So, okay, how systems prevent unnecessary costs. I'll give you an example of this. So I had a clinician who came to us, and it was actually like over the summer. And she was really concerned because her practice was really struggling. And she was really having trouble with cash flow. She was really having trouble, paying bills, and she hadn't paid herself in quite a while. Very common story. And I talked to her a little bit, and she told me, yeah, I think I might be overstaffed. And I said, okay, well, what's going on? And she said, I've got 5 admin people, and I think that's too many. I said, all right, well, what's going, and this is a very early conversation, right? So I didn't have much detail. So like, well, how big is the practice overall? She's like, I've got 5 providers. I was like, you've got 5 providers and you've got 5 admin? And she said, yeah. And I said, wow, how did that happen? And she said, well, I hired my first admin person. Then they kept telling me they were swamped and they couldn't get all the work done. So I hired some more and I kind of kept going until I felt like we had enough. And I was like, oh man, that's a tough spot. So basically what it came down to was we wanted to be very clear on who these people's roles are, what their roles are and what was involved, what they were doing, what were they struggling with, right? So there was this sort of subdivision of what their job duties were and their responsibilities and what they were good at and what they weren't, and whether they were doing stuff they shouldn't even do. Like I don't want to malign these folks. They, we can't necessarily assume they were lying. They may very well have been given a bad process. They may very well have been put in a bad system. Some of these handoffs between the clinicians and them may not have been very good at all, right? So there were so many things, like when you think about that, before they jumped to additional hires, there were so many things to diagnose, so many things to dig into and think about and look at. And so if you really do sort of subdivide, write things down, create a little flow chart or put it on a whiteboard or whatever, but if you just get your arms around and start to think about it, you start to see the forest for the trees a little bit, what's actually going on, what's working well, what's not. And again, don't think you need this sort of grand assessment. You just got to start getting in there and figuring out what is slowing people down and what is creating the challenges. The ultimate mindset shift here is that systems are never done. And so in an area where, a lot of practice owners and clinicians I met with are a little bit like me. They're kind of perfectionists, right? So they really want things to look perfect, but the real truth is it's never done. And if you aim for it to be done, What that just means is that when it's done, it's going to get stale and it's not going to be relevant anymore. And no one's going to look at it and your effort will be wasted. They have to live. And so another quote I really like, John Mark Comer said, trying to have it all together is like eating a meal and hoping you can have eaten once and for all, right? So if you think about that, that's almost ludicrous, right? How could I sit down and have a dinner and like just nail it and be done, right? That's not how it works. So, but it's good because, you know, we think about that with systems. Sometimes we think we're going to get this perfect system and we'll dial it all in and everything's going to be there. It has to live and breathe and it has to evolve as we do. Continuous improvement is the goal. And so you want to ultimately what you want to do is you want to find a way where you can just get started. So here we go. Let's talk about that. So right now, you know, I could go ahead and go into how you could set it up on a Google sheet, how you could do like a doc with all these links to everything. You could do a flow chart with little sticky notes and turn them side to side, or you could do something, you know, in Lucid chart and do this diagram. All that's irrelevant. All that is totally irrelevant. This is going to be my challenge to you right now. I want you to send someone on your team, even if it's an outside vendor or if you're a solo, send an email to yourself and say, let's talk about our system for blank. Send that email now. I'm going to give you 10 seconds. Cool. Future you is going to thank you for that. Now, all you need to do is just start writing things down. And now, keep in mind, we're in the information age, right? So information is everywhere. This is just more information. What is highly valuable now is implementation. So that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where you make some imperfect steps towards some better outcomes, some perfect outcomes, right? So you've made the first step. Your future you will thank you for this. And I hope there's tons of questions. I'll just kind of leave our last slide up here. I hope you got things rolling and you're very, very excited about your progress towards a not so perfect, but live systems documentation process. And so, Katie, I'll just turn it back to you for how we handle things next.
All right, awesome. Thanks. Yeah, so we can go ahead and leave your screen up if you want so people can get that QR code, right? And your email address there. Yeah, so we do have a couple of questions from folks. So let's see. What are the most important processes to document for various size practices, or if it's different between each?
Yeah, totally. I'd say the most important process is hiring. We take hiring for granted. You know, there was a period about 4 years where my business was growing like crazy. I think I hired 18 people and not all of them stuck around. And it's very easy after you go through that to think, man, I just can't find good people. The real truth is hiring is a skill. Hiring is also a process, and hiring is a process that's part of a system. And so if we don't know really what the job duties are, and don't take it for granted, right? We have to actually know what people are going to be doing. We have to actually know what their day is going to look like, what their week or month or year is going to look like, what their responsibilities are to their teammates, to themselves, and what our expectations truly are. Not only that, but most practices I'm working with are growing substantially year over year, right? There's a lot going on. The stigma subsided, right? Most those of you who are in mental health probably you've been at this for a while, you spent a lot of your career wishing that people would acknowledge the incredible thing you have to offer for them. Well, people are doing that more and more now. So there's a lot of growth. So it's very important not just to hire for where you're at now, but to hire strategically for where you will be soon. That's the biggest thing I see. Hiring is its own skill, and you have to work to be exceptionally good at it. And that means you have to ask excellent questions. You have a process for those interviews. You don't want to miss your opportunity to ask that golden question that gives you that understanding of what that person's really like, whether they'll fit into what you're doing, whether they'll understand the process, be able to learn the process, and willing to execute it, right? You want to be able to get everything out of those interviews and make sure then when you're looking at all these potential candidates afterward You want to be sure you have a method for care, carefully comparing them all and successfully comparing them all, so you don't miss a good hire in sort of a slew of people. One of the biggest challenges people run into is they put off hiring for too long, and they do it in sort of a haphazard manner, and they find themselves needing someone now, and so
Mhm.
they make a short-sighted decision. And we're all hard-centered people, hopefully. And so kind of the flip side of that is, when you bring someone on into your organization as a hire, you typically either literally or figuratively make a promise to them that you want to keep, right? None of us, very few of us hire people with the intention of keeping them forever and feel great when we tell them they've got to go, right? Firing someone or terminating someone, even when you know you should, is hard. So again, think about that future you. Set the right expectations, have the right expectations, and communicate them well. Ask the right questions. So when you hire someone, you felt you did your absolute best job to get the best candidate. That is a skill, and that's a process. It's part of a system, and its value is typically way understated.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Um, how do you most effectively audit, create, store, and share documentation for those systems?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of Google Suite, and I know that Google Suite has a HIPAA umbrella you can get under. So I think it's a really good avenue to take. The way they do the cross-linking between documents is really exceptional. There's actually an avenue where you can, what am I trying to say? You can link from one Google Sheet, you can pull information from a whole separate Google Sheet, right? So what you can do is you can have like a checklist, for instance, in a Google Sheet, and you can have a little date on there that says last modified or last executed, right? You can have that pulled into another sheet so you can see how often people are using it. That's great, right? A documented system and process is exceptional. An unused document
Mhm.
system and process kind of sucks. The other thing I like about Google Suite is it's free, of course. Most people are already using it, so you could start right now. But that's one of the things you want. That would be an ultimate attribute that you're looking for. Is you want something where it's easy for people to get into. Nowadays, that kind of means they could access it on any platform, a tablet, a phone, a laptop, or a desktop computer. They can access it on any platform. They can share it, and they can like stream of consciousness get something into that workflow, right? And you might even have a page. For us, we call it our SOC, stream of consciousness, right? We go there and we just drop things. It's like, it really would be good if we could do X, or like, we need to talk to so and so, like, so all those little things basically get routed into the system. That emulates Getting Things Done by David Allen. Have like a Dropbox. So like, anyway, I'm rambling now, but like, the idea is you want something where it sort of links. People go there. If you think about that basic functionality, I'm really just talking about a table of contents of some type. You want people able to go to it. You want people to search it. You want it to be live across the organization, not like held only in,
Mhm.
on your server or whatever. You want people to be able to contribute to it. And I think that's a great platform for it. Teams works well for that, but those are the main attributes you look for. So.
Yeah, great. So similar how you have your questions for identifying bottlenecks, do you have any questions for maybe like single points of failure, especially those like mission critical pieces, anyway, for identifying those?
Um, yeah. So, the first step I would look for when I'm working with a client is their history, right? Never forget about the data you have. So if you send out that survey, one example another question like you could ask is, you could say, did you ever come back from a vacation and feel immediately overwhelmed, right? That's a sign that there's a loop, that there's only one person who's closing. And if that's the case, then that's a bottleneck, and that's a significant risk of failure. We know, not just because of the fact that there's stuff that piled up, that we have an issue, but if that person was gone for whatever reason, that would continue, right? So we do want some level of cross training and redundancy in an organization. not just for like replacement of that workload and fulfillment of that workload, but if we have cross training and redundancy, we have peer contribution, right? So, if someone takes over something while someone was gone, they can say, hey, I really noticed that if we use this software for this part of what we were doing, we never have to do it again. And that's a great thing for people to throw out. Often work gets siloed, and we want to emphasize that we're working together as a team. And so if anyone feels like they're doing something entirely on their own, that's a real cause for failure. And you might be able to diagnose that by asking on that survey, or just kind of checking with people. Is there anything you think that just piles up and you never get to it? Right? Let's close those loops. Year over year with our team members, their roles should change. They should require new training because they get up to another skill level. They get promoted somehow. They're responsible for new things. They're responsible for new things, not because we hire new people necessarily, but because they got really good at what they did, right? So part of, everybody wants to be on a winning team. And so part of that is finding those things that they're stuck with, helping them resolve it, right? That's the 15% they have. The 85% is making that person efficient so they can be part of a winning team and they can succeed. I hope that helps.
Great. What systems tend to break most often within behavioral health organizations?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about hiring. That's a big one. I've seen that create a lot of challenges with people sort of getting stuck with hires that don't work for them now where they're at. Probably the second one I would say is compliance is very important, right? You're in an environment that's governed by state boards and licenses. There's insurance, and as an example for one of my clients, this I think is actually a really good example. So she was growing. She brought on an internal biller, and that, again, a hire. She hired an employee to do her billing, and she thought that person was pretty exceptional until she basically discovered that there was $200,000 being owed from insurance, and like no alarms were ringing. Like it was just sort of like an afterthought, and they realized, oh my gosh, we have all this money that's owed to us. That's a great example. So billing and compliance are areas where there's sort of these snakes in the grass, and the valuable thing we're trying to get from it, or like the risk we're trying to avoid, only comes up when there's like a serious problem. So like we're typically, like as a banker I know once said, everything's fine until it isn't. So look for those things where you wouldn't even know unless it was a complete disaster, right? And compliance is one. Like if you have things going on in the practice that are non-compliant, you should already have had a manual that would preclude that. If you have things going on in billing, even private pay, problem or processes related to that aren't, in a perfect world, guaranteed to give you that result you want, something's going to linger in there and it could bite you.
So someone said, building all of these systems and documents, seems like it'll take a lot of time that we just don't have. Like we're really, strapped already. So do you have any advice on like doing this effectively and without wasting too much time?
Yeah. So I'm going to use another quote. So there was one of the first like Tai Chi teachers in America. His name was Chang Man Ching, and a lot of his students would come to him and say, "This just seems like so much work. I don't know how I'm ever going to accomplish anything." And he said to them, "This is the layering of paper." Right? So what he meant by that is, if you think about like, a stack of paper that's like 10 reams, it's still just made up of individual pieces of paper, right? So the challenge would be kind of in response to that, lower your standards. Lower your standards for this. It's a garden you're trying to grow, and it's not going to grow overnight. And so you have to be okay with it being imperfect really for quite a long time, before it starts to give you that feedback, right? It's not going to happen overnight. So that's why I just try to say start really, really small. And I can use another example. So Tim Ferriss, who's a little bit of a lifestyle hacker and kind of e-commerce sort of person. He had this great concept, I thought, which is attachment. So the biggest challenge with any habit is typically attachment. How do we get this habit sort of into our system? And so he said, instead of people in January, instead of them deciding that they were going to go to the gym 4 times a week, no matter what, and get an hour workout in every single time, he said, instead, make a rule that you're going to go to the gym, walk inside the gym, and leave 4 times a week. Start there because you get to this level, you set a standard at this level where you're like, okay, I could never talk myself out of that. Like literally just going and walking in and leaving. So what you could do then is you could sort of set an appointment with yourself, 15 minutes once a week, and just say you're going to get one step written down. Make it simple. Start small. Start with attachment and make it easy on yourself and start with a low standard that you can't talk yourself out of. After a while, you'll find yourself getting some momentum and you'll find yourself getting these insights and they'll sort of come like just at random times throughout the week or throughout the month or throughout the work you're doing. And you'll say, ooh, let me write that down. I don't want to forget about that step. You'll go to a webinar with an EHR company, for instance, and they'll share something and you'll say, oh, wait, let me add that, right? So it's almost like journaling in a way. Like you just want to have a place where those things can go and just start there and let it just sort of start to percolate. And especially if you have associates or if you have peers, if you're a solo practitioner, you could work with some other solos that you're friends with and say, hey, would you guys mind if we just sort of collaborate on like a process document for us? And so make it easy, try to make it fun, but hold yourself to a low standard. I think that's the best.
Nice. How often do you think folks need to be auditing these systems?
Yeah, I would say if you were going to review the whole thing, top to bottom, maybe once a year. It's also that's a delegable thing, right? So if you have other team members that you're working with, you could you could assign a review to certain segments, but you really should go through it once a year. If you want to also have an avenue to make that easy, some of the AI products you have nowadays, especially ones that are HIPAA compliant, you could dump your whole manual in there and say, hey, are there any rules that have come out over the past year that this is now non-compliant with? So some of that stuff can be made a little bit more easy than you might think, especially nowadays. But that would be the first thing to do is sort of set a timeline you can live with. I think about a year is a good time to look through it. But even more importantly, have there be live contribution, right? We don't want it to get stale, right? Because there could have been a rule that changed, with, insurance or compliance or hiring or whatever. It changed last week. Excuse me. And now you need to comply. So you just want everyone to be able to contribute to it. So all those things have a chance to get funneled in.
How do you know if your system is just bad?
Yeah. So let's use the ultimate numerator for that. Your system is bad if you're in an industry where things are generally going pretty well, which I would say mental health private practice is. There's a lot of growth. There's a lot more interest in what you do. And if that's the case and you're not getting good financial results that you feel comfortable with and you can live with, that's the ultimate bottom line, right? That's the ultimate sign something preceding, everything you've done with the start of you getting your education and your skill set. There's something that's not going all the way through to the bottom line. So you can start there. Like truly, if that's the best ultimate diagnostic, if the financial results aren't suitable for you, some design of this system and process is not working correctly. And so that's essentially the avenue we go at with what we do. We understand the financial picture really, really well. I'm not as good at it as tying my shoes, but I'd say I'm close to an expert. And so, we use that as a diagnostic tool, and even if it's just like, what was a month where things went worse than another? Okay, we'll start there. Like, what happened that month? So again, subdivide, but like the biggest sign of things not going well is a bad financial result. Because ideally, we should see great financial results if everything's stacked together well. Other symptoms, of course, would be if there's a workload that you never get to. So sometimes we become kind of numb to things, like uh, we'll walk around with rocks in our shoes. In real life, maybe we won't, especially if our shoes are perfectly tied. But typically in business and in life, like it's things like we have a lot of things that are not necessarily acute; they're sort of chronic, right? We just sort of deal with it, right? So you want to try to find an avenue where you don't become numb to these things that just aren't working for you. So try to just take some time to like think through, have a place where you write down, pain points. Sometimes we will prescribe. I don't prescribe, but sometimes as an advisor, I'll tell my clients, just keep a pain points journal. Keep an appointment with yourself, 2 to 3 minutes at the end of the day. Write down 2 to 3 things that didn't work well. It's just a pet peeve, or you just a complaint, right? Give yourself an opportunity to sort of complain about the day for 2 to 3 minutes. If you've done that over a month, you have data. Like most of the time, we think of data as like figures and like big graphs and charts and tables and stuff. But a list of the things that bugged you day over day for 4 weeks, you're going to find something in there that it's like, I should never be doing this. Someone else should be doing it because I procrastinate or I'm not good at it, or really there's someone else on my team who's better, so little things like that can help.
Awesome. All right, so we have just a couple more minutes here. So we've got 2 more questions for you. So when you notice that financial growth maybe is starting to become stagnant, what's that first like system that you look at?
Definitely marketing. So whatever we've been doing with marketing, if we feel like our growth has become stagnant, um, somehow we've become irrelevant to new customers. And so we want to start digging into our marketing and start seeing what is working and what hasn't. If growth has become stagnant, I'm going to assume that you've been at it for a while and you've seen some good growth. So what you want to start doing is you want to start seeing, did we change something, and did we make a bad change? Like did we move in a direction with our message or our content or our channels or our platform or whatever that it could have been a mistake, right? That could be it. It could also be that the way you're working with these different avenues, you're not actually getting to your ideal prospects, people who are actually wanting whatever it is you offer. So that'd be the first thing I'd look at is, dig into the marketing. You'll have some data if it's as you described, and you should be able to see what has been working well and what hasn't.
Awesome. Okay. And just one last question here. How many quotes do you have memorized?
How many,
That was my question.
how many quotes do I have memorized? So there's a guy named Peter Drucker, I believe, who wrote this article about the multidisciplinary approach to thinking. So I think it's because I'm a Libra. I'm always like, is this like that? Like, is this like that? And everything
Mhm.
should reconcile because I'm an accountant. So like, I tend to always look at things and see like, well, how does this align? I really want to understand things. And the other thing that's, kind of backing that, I appreciate you asking, is because, when I'm working with clients, we try to dig into the data. We do dig into the data. And that's because, like Deming said, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. So I like it when my clients trust me, but I like to find avenues where they don't have to. I like to find avenues where I stand on things, other people who did things better than I did were smarter than I am, and I can say that's what they said, that's what that person said, that's what everyone was saying, so that's what we're going to do. That's what the data tells us, and so it's generally a habit of mine, I guess. But I hope it was helpful.
Yeah, no, that was great. All right, awesome. Yeah, well, thanks so much, James, for coming on and presenting. It was definitely some very, very valuable information. If you guys haven't snagged that QR code that's on the screen, definitely go ahead and make sure you do that. And James, what's the best way for folks to contact you or reach out if they have any questions or want to look at your
Yeah.
services?
Yeah, you can just email us, info@childresscpa.com, CHILDRESS, or you can also go to our website, cacadvisors.com.
Okay, awesome. Great. Well, for those folks who are with Checkpoint, you'll be getting this recording as well as some links to how you can contact James. Yeah, so thank you so much. And we look forward to another one soon.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate sharing your time today.
All right, thanks. Have a good day. Bye-bye.